Was I
There are a
in,
lot more islands in the Pacific to get shipwrecked on than there are in the Atlantic. But
So what island were you shipwrecked on?
it was an island called Vahunga.
What?
Vahunga.
Vahunga.
Yeah. V for Victor. Ahunga.
And how many days were you there?
67 days.
Boy. Okay. So what's this special story you're going to tell?
Well, I'm going to tell a story about going to, what's the native name? I like to use the native names of the islands, and that is Tahiti, which is in English is called Fanning Island, which is about 1,000 miles south of the big island of Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 1,200 miles south of Honolulu. And so I used to do a sailing school and take people back and forth there. And it's a beautiful, beautiful little atoll island with a village of Gilbertese natives on it, who are ethnically sort of half Polynesian and half Melanesian, which is related but different ethnicity. So they were very far, they are part of the country of Kiribati, which is spelled Kiribati, Kiribati, but they pronounce T as S, and so they pronounce it Kiribati, which in the old colonial days was the Gilbert Islands, and it's the way they pronounce Gilbert. Gilbert, Kiribati, you know, and so they call themselves Kiribati Islands, but they were, in the old days, they were the British colony called the Gilbert Islands. The Gilbert Islands these are outlying islands, and I do mean outlying. They're 1,800 miles away from Tarawa, their main capital island. And Tarawa was where the tide against the Japanese in World War II turned. There was an enormous naval battle fought in Tarawa, and it's the first battle that the U.S. won in the World War II. But anyway, I went back and forth from my island, which was only 1,200 miles from Honolulu, where I would load my cargo. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I used to sailing students down there and back. And since the Tahiti Island only received 1 or 2 ships a year, I would come in with fresh flour. They wanted fresh flour. They wanted rice that didn't have weevils already hatched out in it. They wanted baking powder. One of the things they wanted was baking powder. And but they also wanted bicycle inner tubes. There was no vehicles on the island at all, except bicycles was the highest tech transportation. And so I had fresh flour and rice and stuff to give them in limited amounts, but they wanted me to come back and bring more. And I would come back and forth to this island teaching sailing, and nobody else from the Western world would go there more than once. Yachts would stop by there and pass on, and they'd say, "This is a beautiful island, beautiful lagoon inside, and beautiful village and coconut plantation, and gee, someday I'll come back," you know. But nobody ever came back except me. So they started ordering food from me, and I would bring them fresh flour and fresh rice. In fact, my boat became too small, and so I was in the market for a larger boat. And somehow or other, through the coconut wireless, this guy heard of me and called me up, and he wanted to sell a big boat that was actually had a hold in it, sailing, an old sailing ship. It was 100 feet long on deck. It was 135 feet long all told, and it had been built in 1916. It was riveted iron, which is much more durable than steel because it's the pure element. It doesn't have, steel has little bits of other metals in it, and they corrode. And it had a hold in it. I could carry about 270 tons of cargo in it. So it was for sale for a price that I could afford, and which was very, very low price. I mean, it didn't have any, it was too big to be a yacht. It was too small to be a cargo vessel and too slow, and nobody wanted a sailing cargo vessel. It was a sailing vessel, everything, but I bought it. And I used to sail back and forth to this island where I knew people. And one time, and I was there, I brought them fresh rice and flour, which was what they really needed and wanted. Because their own government would send one ship or two ships a year, and they were so far away from their capital island, Tarawa, 1,800 miles, that they would just sort of clean out the warehouse to load up this ship that was going to go to Awahnee, and they'd get the broken bags of cement, and the old bags of flour that had been around for months and months. And the people that lived on the island, the weevils would be already hatched out by the time they even received the rice and the flour, and so.
So what does that look like?
Well, they're crawling around through, they're little bugs that they're smaller than a fly, but they're big enough to see, and they, they proliferate, and they float when you wash the rice. They float off, but they leave a taste behind, a kind of a metallic taste, and it's awful anyway. So I'd bring them fresh stuff down from Honolulu. And one time a yachtsman came to me while I was in Hawaii between trips, and he had been he'd been in a big storm, and he'd been sailing with his wife and his son for 2 or 3 years, and the worst storm he ever got into was right off the south coast of Hawaii Island, where I live, on South Point. And he came into the bay where I live, and he, all the people in the village knew where my house was and everything, and he knew me by name, but I'd never met him. And so they showed him which house was mine. He came up and knocked on my door, and he said, "Do you know anybody who wants to buy a boat?" He said, "I've had it, I've been sailing for 2.5 years, and I got into the worst storm I've ever gotten into just a few days ago, and everything on board is wet, and we're all tired, and we've had enough sailing, and blah, blah, blah." So